She had nothing but courage. On the streets of Los Angeles, a poor girl selling candies faced a choice that would change her life forever. When a luxury car crashed in front of her eyes, everyone else pulled out their phones, but she risked it all to save the man inside. What she didn't know was that this man was one of the richest billionaires in the city, and her act of kindness would transform both their destinies in ways no one could imagine. Emily Martinez had grown up in East Los Angeles, a neighborhood where every day was a fight for survival. At just 22, she sold candies at traffic lights, weaving between cars with a tired smile. Her small apartment smelled of dampness, the walls thin enough to hear neighbors arguing. She kept a notebook under her mattress, filled with sketches of hospitals and dreams of nursing school. Each page was a reminder of the life she longed for, but could not afford. Despite her struggles, Emily never lost her spark of compassion. She often gave away candies to hungry kids who had no money, even if it meant going home with less. Her mother used to tell her, "Mija, kindness is your true wealth." Those words echoed in Emily's mind every night as she counted her few crumpled bills. She wanted to believe that her kindness mattered, though the world rarely rewarded it. The city of Los Angeles glittered with wealth, but her life was cast in its shadows. On the streets, Emily noticed the divide more than anyone. Expensive cars rolled past her, their drivers barely sparing her a glance. She had memorized the patterns of traffic lights, knew when she could dart between lanes, and when she had to step back quickly. Sometimes she wondered if any of these rich people ever thought about lives like hers. To them, she was invisible, just another face on the streets. Still, she held on to hope that life could change. Her evenings were always the hardest. After hours of standing in the sun, her legs ached, and her throat felt dry from repeating the same line. Candies for $1. She often walked home with sore feet and calloused hands. Yet she would pass by hospitals on the way and stop for a moment, staring at the nurses rushing inside. She imagined herself in their shoes, caring for patients, saving lives, being someone who truly made a difference. One Friday night, after a long day, Emily felt unusually restless. She had only sold half her candies and worried about how to pay her rent. As she made her way home, she wandered farther than usual, walking along Sunset Boulevard. Neon lights flickered across the sidewalks, music from clubs echoed, and luxury cars lined the streets. For a moment, she felt like she had stepped into another world. Emily's eyes caught a glimpse of a sleek black car speeding past. The engine roared, and the vehicle swerved dangerously. She frowned, clutching her bag of unsold candies tighter. Seconds later, a loud crash shattered the air. The sound of metal twisting and glass shattering echoed through the night. People screamed, and cars honked in panic. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she rushed toward the sound. Crowds began to gather, phones raised high to record the scene. The car had smashed into a light pole, smoke rising from the hood. Emily pushed past bystanders who only stood there watching. Her instincts told her someone was inside, someone who needed help. Her pulse raced as she ran closer, ignoring the shouts of people warning her it was dangerous. When she reached the car, she saw the driver slumped over the wheel. Blood trickled down his forehead, and his chest barely moved. Emily's hands shook as she tried to open the door, but it was jammed. The smell of gasoline filled the air, sharp and terrifying. She coughed, but refused to back away. Everyone else had their phones out, but no one moved to help. "Please, someone help me," she screamed, but no one stepped forward. Tears welled in her eyes as frustration grew. She pulled with all her strength, her hands burning as the metal scraped her skin. Finally, with one desperate tug, the door creaked open slightly. She squeezed through and grabbed the man's arm, trying to pull him free. The man groaned faintly, his eyes fluttering open for just a second. Emily whispered, "Hang on, I've got you." With one last surge of strength, she dragged him out just as sparks burst under the hood. The crowd gasped, and seconds later, a small explosion erupted from the car. Emily shielded the man with her body, trembling, but relieved he was alive. If this first chapter touched your heart, imagine how much deeper the journey will go. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now and stay with us as this story unfolds. The night air was filled with smoke, fire, and chaos. Emily's heart pounded as she dragged the injured man onto the pavement. His face was pale and his breathing shallow, but he was alive. People rushed closer now, some yelling to call 911, others still recording with their phones. Emily pressed her hands against his wound, trying to slow the bleeding. She had no training, only instinct, but she refused to let him slip away. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights painted the buildings as paramedics arrived. They pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside Emily and the man. One of them asked sharply, "Are you family?" Emily shook her head, her voice hoarse. "No, I just pulled him out." They gently moved her aside, but the look on their faces showed respect. She had done what no one else dared. As they lifted the man onto a stretcher, Emily finally saw his face clearly. Despite the blood, his features were sharp, strong, someone accustomed to power. He looked nothing like the people in her neighborhood. For a brief moment, she wondered who he was, what kind of life he lived. Then she reminded herself it didn't matter. She had done what anyone with a heart should do. The paramedics worked quickly, securing him inside the ambulance. One of them turned to Emily and said, "You probably saved his life." Her chest tightened with both relief and disbelief. She wanted to stay, to know if he would be okay, but she knew she didn't belong in that world. Without another word, she slipped away into the crowd before anyone could stop her. As Emily walked back toward East LA, her clothes smelled of smoke, her hands scraped and aching. She replayed the scene over and over in her head, the explosion, his faint groan, the weight of his body in her arms. She felt both terrified and strangely fulfilled. For the first time, she had saved a life, even if she didn't know his name. Meanwhile, the ambulance sped through the city, sirens blaring. The injured man's name was Richard Anderson, one of Los Angeles's most powerful real estate magnates. He had everything, money, fame, influence, but tonight, his life had hung by a thread in the hands of a stranger. Unaware of her identity, Richard drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by the face of the young woman who pulled him from the flames. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, doctors rushed Richard into emergency care. News of his accident spread quickly through elite circles. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, hungry for details. Some whispered about reckless driving, others about business rivals. None of them knew the truth that a candy seller had been the one to save him. Back in her apartment, Emily washed her hands, the cuts stinging under cold water. She sat on her bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if she would ever hear about him again. Part of her hoped he would recover and live a long life, even if he never knew who had saved him. She whispered a quiet prayer before closing her eyes. For Richard, the night was just the beginning of a journey he never expected. He had been pulled back from the brink, not by wealth, not by influence, but by the bravery of someone the world often ignored. And though he didn't know it yet, his life and Emily's were forever changed. The ambulance doors slammed shut as Emily slipped quietly into the crowd. Her heart was still racing, and her clothes smelled like gasoline and smoke. She walked quickly, not wanting attention or recognition, only relief that the man was alive. People continued whispering about the explosion, but Emily didn't stay to hear. She hugged her candy bag, half full, and disappeared into the night. At Cedars-Sinai, Richard Anderson fought for consciousness. His body ached, his head throbbed, and flashes of the accident haunted him. The faint memory of a young woman's voice whispered, "Hang on, I've got you." He wondered if it had been a dream or if someone had truly saved him. Surrounded by doctors and machines, Richard realized that, for once, his wealth could not have saved him. When the police asked questions, witnesses described a young Latina girl who had pulled Richard out of the car, but no one knew her name. Some said she had vanished before the paramedics arrived, as if she didn't want credit. Richard was unsettled. He was used to people wanting something from him: money, favors, influence. Why would anyone risk their life and then walk away? Meanwhile, Emily sat in her small apartment, her scraped hands bandaged with pieces of cloth. She replayed the moment again and again. The man's faint groan, the fire behind them. She didn't know his name or his world, but something told her he was important. Yet she didn't want to get involved further. Saving him had been enough. She was just glad he was alive. The next morning, news of Richard Anderson's crash spread across Los Angeles. Headlines called it a near tragedy of a billionaire mogul. Pictures of the wreck flooded the internet. Emily's stomach tightened as she read the articles, realizing the man she had saved wasn't just anyone. He was one of the richest men in California, and she was nothing more than a candy seller. Richard woke slowly, the sterile hospital room filling his senses. Machines beeped steadily, nurses moved quietly, and the smell of antiseptic lingered in the air. His head was heavy, but the image of the woman pulling him from the flames refused to fade. He wanted answers. Who was she, and why had she helped him? It gnawed at him more than the pain in his body. Doctors and lawyers surrounded his bed, updating him on his condition and business matters. Richard barely listened. Instead, he asked, "Who saved me?" Their silence spoke louder than words. No one knew. The mystery both frustrated and intrigued him. For the first time in years, Richard cared less about money and more about a stranger. News reports speculated about the accident. Some blamed reckless driving. Others suggested foul play from business rivals. None mentioned the young woman who risked her life. Richard felt a growing urgency to find her. She had done something rare, shown selfless courage in a city where everyone seemed to want something. That alone made her unforgettable. Back in East LA, Emily tried to push the memory aside. She focused on selling candies, smiling at strangers who ignored her. But every time she saw a luxury car, her chest tightened. She wondered if Richard had survived the night, if he was recovering. She wanted to know, but she didn't belong in his world. Their paths had crossed only by fate, and fate rarely repeated itself. Richard stared out his hospital window at the city skyline. For years, those towers had symbolized power and success. Now they felt empty. Somewhere out there was a girl who had seen him at his weakest and saved him without asking for anything. He vowed quietly to himself, "I'll find her." Days later, Richard was discharged from the hospital, still sore but determined. He ordered his assistant to track down every witness from the crash. One name kept coming up, a young woman selling candies nearby. Using reporters' hints, Richard finally traced her to East Los Angeles. Curiosity burned in him. Why would someone like her risk everything for him? Emily was startled when a sleek car pulled up near her usual corner. Richard stepped out, dressed in a crisp suit, his presence impossible to ignore. People stared, wondering what a billionaire was doing in their neighborhood. Emily's heart pounded. She recognized him instantly, but never expected to see him again. She gripped her candy bag tighter, unsure what to do. Richard approached with a forced smile, extending an envelope filled with money. "You saved my life. This is just a small thank you." Emily froze, her eyes darting between him and the envelope. The crowd whispered excitedly around them. With trembling hands, she pushed it back toward him. "I don't want your money. I only wanted you to live." Her refusal stunned Richard. He had never met anyone who rejected his wealth so directly. For a moment, he felt small, stripped of power. Emily's voice was soft but firm. "You don't owe me anything." With that, she turned away, walking quickly, her heart heavy. Richard stood speechless, the envelope still in his hand, watching her vanish into the crowd. That night, Emily lay awake, replaying the scene. She worried she had been too harsh, but she couldn't accept his money. It would cheapen what she had done. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his penthouse, staring at the city lights, haunted by her words. For the first time in years, he felt something money couldn't buy: humility. Emily's quiet life changed the next morning. News outlets splashed her picture across their pages. "Candy seller saves billionaire Richard Anderson." At first it seemed like praise, but soon the criticism began. Online comments accused her of chasing fame, calling her a fraud. Neighbors whispered that she had taken advantage of the situation. Emily felt the weight of their judgment. Strangers began showing up at her corner, snapping pictures as she tried to sell candies. Some mocked her, others demanded interviews. Emily hated the attention, wishing she had never been seen at all. She wasn't a hero, just a girl who did the right thing. Yet, the world twisted her story into something ugly. Every night, she cried in silence. Richard read the headlines too, and anger flared inside him. He had caused this storm without meaning to. She had saved him, and now people punished her for it. Guilt gnawed at him. He realized he needed to do more than offer money. He needed to protect her reputation, maybe even her future. But how could he when she wanted nothing from him? Emily's best friend, Sarah, tried to comfort her. "Ignore them, Em. People don't know the truth." But Emily couldn't ignore it. Each whisper, each cruel comment reminded her that she didn't belong in Richard's world. She feared she had made a mistake by pulling him out of that car. Maybe saving him had only ruined her own life. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his office staring at the articles. His empire was thriving, but none of it mattered compared to the girl who had risked her life for him. He realized something undeniable. Emily Martinez was unlike anyone he had ever met, and he wasn't ready to let her slip away. Richard decided to see Emily again, this time without money in hand. He drove himself to East Los Angeles, leaving behind the comfort of his penthouse. The streets felt foreign to him, murals on walls, kids playing soccer in alleys, and small markets buzzing with life. He spotted Emily near her corner, her shoulders tense as she sold candies with a tired smile. When Emily saw him approach, her face hardened. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice sharp. Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around, taking in the poverty that surrounded her. "I wanted to understand where you come from," he finally said. Emily narrowed her eyes. "People like you don't care about places like this." Their conversation drew stares from curious onlookers. Richard, unbothered, asked, "What do you want in life, Emily?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I want to be a nurse. But dreams don't pay rent." For the first time, Richard saw the weight she carried, dreams suffocated by reality. He admired her honesty, even if she kept him at a distance. As they spoke, Sarah walked up and pulled Emily aside. "You can't trust him. Guys like that always want something." Emily felt torn. Part of her wanted to believe Richard's sincerity, but her friend's warning echoed in her mind. She had been disappointed too many times before. Her instinct told her to protect herself. Richard left that day without winning her trust. But as he drove back to his world of glass towers and luxury, her words lingered. Dreams don't pay rent. He realized he had spent his life surrounded by people chasing wealth. Yet this young woman wanted something more meaningful, and that made her unforgettable. Over the following weeks, Richard returned often, sometimes buying candies, sometimes just talking. At first, Emily kept her guard up, answering briefly and avoiding eye contact. But slowly she began to soften. He asked about her childhood, her mother's sayings, and the notebook where she wrote about nursing school. To his surprise, she let him read a page. Richard found himself captivated by her determination. Unlike people in his circle, Emily spoke without pretense. She laughed easily, though her struggles were real. He admired how she gave food to kids on the street, even when she had little for herself. Each visit revealed more layers, and Richard realized he was no longer there out of curiosity. He simply wanted to see her smile. One evening, Richard invited her for coffee at a small diner instead of a fancy restaurant. Emily agreed reluctantly, but found herself enjoying the simple conversation. For the first time, she looked at him not as a billionaire, but as a man. They talked for hours about life, dreams, and regrets. Emily was surprised by how human he seemed beneath the suits, but not everyone was pleased with this growing bond. Mark Reynolds, Richard's longtime lawyer, noticed the billionaire's distraction. "She's from the streets, Richard," Mark warned coldly. "She'll drag your name into scandal. Distance yourself before it's too late." Richard bristled at the suggestion, feeling anger rise in his chest. For once, he refused to listen. Emily, however, overheard part of the conversation during one of Richard's visits. Her stomach sank as Mark's words replayed in her head. Doubt crept back in, and her old fears resurfaced. She wondered if Richard truly saw her as an equal, or if she was just another charity case in his eyes. Emily's chest tightened as she replayed Mark's words. She had always feared being judged, and now her worst nightmare felt real. That night, she avoided Richard's calls and messages, telling Sarah she wanted distance. "He doesn't belong in my world, and I don't belong in his," she whispered. her voice heavy with disappointment. Richard sensed something was wrong. When he visited her corner, Emily barely looked at him. Her answers were short, her smile gone. "Did I do something?" he asked, searching her eyes. She shook her head but stepped back. "We come from different worlds, Richard. You should forget me." The words stung him more than he expected. Back in his office, Richard confronted Mark. "What did you say to her?" Mark raised his eyebrows innocently. "I only told you the truth. She's dangerous for your reputation." Richard slammed his fist on the desk, fury in his eyes. "You don't get to decide who's worth my time." For the first time, he felt protective of someone outside his world. Emily, meanwhile, threw herself into work, avoiding places where Richard might find her. But every time she passed by a hospital, her dream resurfaced. She remembered his question, "What do you want in life?" and hated how much it still echoed inside her. She wanted to believe she was strong enough to let go, yet her heart betrayed her. Richard sat in his penthouse that night, staring at the city skyline. For years, he had chased power, money, and recognition, but none of it had filled the emptiness. Now, a girl from East LA haunted his thoughts. He realized it wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper. He needed to prove to her, and to himself, that his intentions were real. Determined, Richard began digging into Emily's life not through investigators, but by visiting her community. He talked to shop owners, neighbors, and even kids she often helped. Everywhere he went, he heard the same thing. Emily had always been selfless, feeding the hungry and caring for the sick. She had saved more than just him. One elderly woman told Richard about a night Emily gave up her own dinner to feed 3 children. Another described how she cleaned wounds for a homeless man with nothing but soap and cloth. Richard listened, humbled. Emily wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She was living the life of someone who already had a nurse's heart, even without the uniform. Meanwhile, Emily struggled with her emotions. She missed Richard, but pride held her back. "He'll never see me as his equal," she told Sarah. But deep inside, she longed to believe he saw more in her. Each night she prayed for clarity, asking for strength to follow her path, even if it meant being alone. One evening, Richard returned to her corner with nothing in his hands, no money, no offers, just sincerity. "Emily," he said softly, "I know who you are now. You've been saving people your whole life. You don't need wealth to prove your worth." Emily froze, her heart pounding, her defenses faltering. His words cut deeper than anything she expected. For the first time, she looked at him without suspicion. The world around them seemed to fade, and all she could hear was his voice. "You saved me once," he whispered. "But I think you've been saving people long before that. And that's why I can't walk away." Emily's eyes filled with tears, torn between trust and fear. Richard's words lingered in Emily's heart, but her pride refused to let her accept his help. When he gently offered to pay for her nursing school, she shook her head. "I don't want charity," she whispered. Richard frowned. "It's not charity, Emily, it's belief in you." But no matter how kind his tone, she couldn't shake the fear of being seen as a burden. That night, Emily poured her feelings into her notebook. She wrote about her dream, her fears, and her doubts. The more she wrote, the more she realized her heart was divided. She wanted to believe in Richard, yet every voice from her past told her not to trust. Growing up poor had taught her that offers from the wealthy often came with strings attached. Richard, on the other hand, struggled with frustration. He wasn't used to rejection, but Emily's refusal wasn't about pride alone, it was about dignity. He admired her for standing firm, but it left him powerless. "How do I prove that I don't see her as charity?" he asked himself, pacing his office late into the night. For once, his money wasn't the answer. Emily's friend Sarah encouraged her to reconsider. "Maybe he's different, Em. Not everyone wants something in return." Emily shook her head. "I can't let myself depend on him. If I fall, it'll hurt too much." Deep down, though, she wondered if her fear of heartbreak was stronger than her desire for a better future. Her own heart had become her greatest obstacle. Richard decided to take a step back, hoping time would help. Yet Emily found herself thinking of him constantly. She hated that he had left a mark she couldn't erase. Pride told her to stay away, but her soul whispered something else, that maybe, just maybe, this man was meant to change her life. One morning, Richard's phone rang with alarming news. There had been an accident at one of his construction sites in downtown Los Angeles. Workers were injured, and the company's negligence was being questioned. Richard rushed to the scene, his chest heavy with guilt. The sight of bloodied workers brought back the memory of his own accident. When Emily heard about the incident on the news, she didn't hesitate. She dropped her candy bag and ran to the site. Her heart pounded as she pushed through the crowd, ignoring the reporters and security guards. To her, the men bleeding on the ground weren't workers or strangers, they were lives in danger. She knelt and began helping with whatever she could. Richard spotted her among the chaos. Emily's hands moved quickly, pressing cloth against wounds, calming terrified workers. Despite her lack of formal training, she worked with instinct and courage. Richard felt his throat tighten. She didn't hesitate to save him, and now she was doing the same for others. Her bravery shone brighter than any wealth. Reporters captured the moment, snapping photos of Emily alongside paramedics. "Who is she?" they asked, recognizing her from the previous headlines. Richard finally stepped forward, raising his voice. "She's the reason lives was saved today. Without her, this could have been worse." For the first time, he publicly defended her, silencing critics with truth. That evening, Emily returned home exhausted, her clothes stained with dirt and blood. Sarah hugged her tightly. "You were amazing, Em." Emily smiled faintly, but her heart raced with confusion. Richard had defended her, and part of her wanted to trust him. Yet she still feared that letting him into her life meant losing control of her own path. The accident at Richard's company made headlines across the nation. Workers accused his business partners of cutting corners on safety regulations. Emily, still shaken by what she had witnessed, confronted Richard. "You can't let them get away with this," she said, her eyes burning with conviction. Richard nodded, torn between loyalty to his partners and his growing admiration for her courage. Mark Reynolds tried to cover up the scandal, insisting it was better to pay off the victims quietly. Richard hesitated, but Emily stood firm. Money won't fix broken bones or broken trust. Do the right thing. Her words pierced him more than any business report ever had. For the first time, Richard felt ashamed of the empire he had built. The next day, Richard called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he announced that his company would take full responsibility for the accident. He fired the executives responsible for the negligence, including one of his oldest allies. "Lives matter more than profits," Richard declared. His words stunned the corporate world, but inspired countless workers. Emily watched the announcement on television, her chest swelling with pride. For years she had felt powerless, but now her voice had helped spark real change. Richard had listened to her, risking his reputation for integrity. It was a moment she would never forget, one that made her see him in a new light. Maybe she thought he truly was different, but not everyone celebrated his decision. Mark, furious at being sidelined, vowed to find a way to destroy Emily's influence over Richard. In the shadows, enemies were forming. Emily had challenged powerful men without even realizing it, and now she stood at the center of a battle far larger than herself. Days after the press conference, Richard invited Emily to his office. The room was filled with documents, city maps, and business plans, but Richard pushed them aside. "Emily," he said softly, "I don't just want to repay you. I want to build something with you." Her heart skipped a beat as she tried to understand the weight of his words. He showed her blueprints of a free community clinic, one he wanted to fund in East Los Angeles. "You dream of being a nurse," Richard continued. "Let's make it happen, not just for you, but for everyone here." Emily stared at the plans, her hands trembling. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Why me?" Richard smiled. "Because you saved me, and now I want to save others with you." For the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine a different future. She saw herself in scrubs, caring for patients, surrounded by a team. More importantly, she saw a future where she and Richard stood side by side, not as billionaire and candy seller, but as equals, united by purpose. Hope began to bloom inside her, stronger than fear. Their bond deepened in those moments, no longer tied by gratitude but by shared vision. Emily's laughter filled Richard's office as they planned together, breaking down barriers that once seemed unmovable. She still feared judgment, but with Richard, she felt braver. He didn't see her as charity, he saw her as a partner. That changed everything. But in the background, Mark watched from afar, his resentment growing. He saw Emily not as a partner, but as a threat. "She's turning him against everything we built," he muttered. His jealousy and ambition were like sparks waiting to ignite. The road ahead for Emily and Richard would not be easy, but their hearts were finally aligned. The grand opening of the community clinic in East Los Angeles drew crowds from every corner of the city. Families, workers, and children filled the streets, celebrating a place built for them. Emily stood at the entrance, her hands trembling as she cut the ribbon. Cheers erupted, and for the first time in her life she felt like she truly belonged. Richard watched proudly as Emily welcomed the first patients inside. He saw her in her element, guiding nurses, comforting children, and offering hope to those who had long been ignored. She was no longer just the girl who sold candies at traffic lights. She was a woman shaping the future of her community. His heart swelled with admiration. Reporters crowded around asking questions. "Why did you do this, Mr. Anderson?" Richard answered simply, "Because she showed me what real wealth is." His words struck a chord with millions watching on television. Overnight, the story of a billionaire transformed by a poor young woman spread across the country, inspiring others to follow their example. That night, Emily sat on the clinic steps with Richard beside her. The building glowed softly under the streetlights, filled with laughter and gratitude. "I never imagined this," Emily whispered. Richard smiled, taking her hand. "Neither did I. But sometimes life brings us exactly what we need when we least expect it." For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe in love and destiny. In the weeks that followed, Emily began her nursing studies, balancing school and her role at the clinic. Letters poured in from across the nation, inviting her to speak at conferences and even expand her project. The future stretched wide before her. She looked at Richard and knew they weren't just building a clinic, they were building a life, one founded on courage, compassion, and a love that had changed them both forever. Sometimes, the richest hearts are found in the poorest places. Emily's courage and Richard's transformation remind us that true wealth is not measured in money, but in compassion. What did this story make you feel? Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. This story reminds us that true wealth is compassion, not money. What about you? Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed everything? Share it in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and join our community of inspiring stories.